Hey, ladies and gentlemen, it's Miss Corcoran coming at you to finish chapter 19. We started with Charles Darwin and his theory of natural selection. And so for the remaining part of chapter 19, we're going to talk about the lines of evidence that support the theory of evolution. And once again, I posted the learning objectives set forth by the College Board for you. Okay, these are our many lines of evolution, or excuse me, evidence to support evolution. Let's see if I can move that real quick. Oh gosh, sorry. You don't have to write them down right now. You can refer to this, but we're going to go through each one of these separately. But first of all, it's direct observation. We can straight up look at life and see that it's changing. Then we can also look at the fossil record and look and see how organisms have changed over time. When we look at the fossil record, we see vestigial structures like whale legs. When we look at the anatomy of organisms, we can see similarities like the mammalian forearm, and we'll talk about that more in just a second. When we look at the embryological development of organisms, we can see similarities shared across very diverse groups, and those similarities suggest that there's a common ancestor. Perhaps, though, the most compelling of all of the evidence would be our biochemical evidence. The fact that all living things use DNA as their molecule of life suggests that all living things share a common ancestor. And then there are biogeographic similarities as well, where related species often tend to come from the same area. And we'll talk about that more in just a little bit. Excuse me. Okay, so in terms of direct evidence for evolution, let's look at this data collected from mosquitoes that are resistant to DDT. DDT is a pesticide that has been banned over much of the planet because DDT actually makes birds' shells very soft. It doesn't kill the birds, but it makes their shells really soft. So when the mama bird sits on them, she kills her babies accidentally. But DDT is used to spray for mosquitoes. It's an insecticide, and we don't want the pests around. So we sprayed it all over our environment. And in the meantime, we caused the bald eagle to be an endangered species. DDT has been banned. It has since recovered, and the bald eagle is no longer endangered. But when I was a little girl in school, the bald eagle was, in fact, an endangered species. So looking at month 0 right here, you can see that in a given population, remember Darwin said there's variation. And some of the variation is that some mosquitoes are resistant to DDT. They just have the gene to be resistant. They got it from their parents, or maybe it was the result of a mutation, but they have it in their DNA. After 8 months of exposure to DDT, we sample our population again and we test it genetically, and we found that 45% of the mosquitoes now carry that gene for resistance. At month 12, we see 77% of the mosquitoes have that gene. So what we've seen is actually microevolution. We see the mosquitoes aren't dying, but on a genetic level, the gene for resistance is providing some immunity. Those organisms are surviving, passing on that gene for immunity or resistance, and such that that gene is now accumulated in that population. So we can look in 12 months and say that this population has evolved. You're going to watch the video of the peppered moth. This is one of my favorite examples of evolution. I won't talk anymore about it. It's a short little video, but it's sort of the quintessential evidence for evolution. Okay, once again, we can look at the fossil record and just see straight up organisms have changed over time. We see similarities among organisms that are now extinct or are now fossils, and we can draw conclusions about how they're related to currently living species. Okay, the prefix homo means same. Let me see, I'll put this over here. Oops, just kidding. It means same. So homologous structures are literally identical structures within different organisms. And if we look at some anatomical homologies, we see among the mammalian forearm, so all of these organisms are mammals, we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 bones that are absolutely identical. Their shape may be a little bit different, but all 7 bones are present. Does this diagram say that humans evolved from bats? It totally doesn't. What it says is that humans cats, whales, and bats all share these same bones, and that it suggests a common ancestry. Sorry. I don't know what's happening. I'm trying to flip it. Okay. I'm going to put this back down here. Okay, we can also look in the fossil record and see things called vestigial structures. A vestige, we could say opening the door for a lady is a vestige from when chivalry was really important. Okay, something left over. I do hope that you always treat the women in your life kindly and that you are polite to all people and open doors for anybody when you get an opportunity. But a vestige is something that's sort of left over. And a vestigial structure would be a leftover structure, one that an ancestor might have used, but a currently living organism is not using. So when you watch this video about the evolution of the whale, and we see the fact that whales have leg bones, we all know that whales don't have legs, but those whale leg bones are vestigial structures. They are leftover structures from the ancestors that used to have legs and that moved back into the water. Okay, when we talk about comparative embryology, we're looking at the development of an organism before birth. And when we see, oh gosh, sorry, a human and a chick, we're comparing these two pictures right here. They both have pharyngeal pouches. They both have a post-anal tail. And I want you to just pause for a second and have a moment of gratitude that our post-anal tail disappears before we're born. But we had one. Does it mean humans came from chicks? No way. It means that both chickens and humans probably share a common ancestor because the manner in which the organism develops before birth is similar. Okay, getting the hang of this. Oops, just kidding. Okay, notice these two stars on this slide. That means it's really, really important. We can look at biochemical or molecular homologies. Once again, the word homo means same. So homologies are similarities. If we look at similarities among biochemical molecules, like proteins, and how do we code for proteins? DNA. So if you have similar DNA, you're certainly going to have similar proteins. And we can basically say that the more DNA an organism has in common with another group, the more recent their common ancestor. In no way are we saying that because, in fact, humans and chimps share like 97% of the same DNA in terms of similarities. We're not saying humans came from chimps. What we're saying is humans and chimps had a common ancestor not too long ago on the evolutionary scale. What can we do with that data? We can take the similarities and we can build an evolutionary tree. A lot of times we don't know necessarily what the common ancestor was, but I want to point out something, and we'll talk more about this when we talk about phylogeny, because this is sort of like a family tree, or it shows phylogeny. I want you to know that this tree right here, number 6, is the common ancestor between ostriches and hawks and other birds. This right here is a fluid branch point. So literally, if this pin is the branch point and my fingers are the ostriches or the hawks and other birds, know that it can flip around either way. Doing a really terrible job illustrating it. But if we rewrote that chart, we could make hawks and birds the bottom from the last, and we could put ostriches on the very bottom, and it wouldn't change the makeup. It doesn't change the fact that number 6 is still their common ancestor, and then number 5 is the bird's common ancestor with the crocodiles. So don't let that trip you up. So the question I have for you is, who is more closely related? Crocodiles and mammals, or crocodiles and hawks? Okay, so let's look at crocodiles right here. Crocodiles and hawks, their common ancestor is right here. Let's look at crocodiles and mammals. Crocodiles and mammals, their common ancestor is right here. Okay, So one can conclude based on this chart that crocodiles are more closely related to hawks than they are to mammals. And indeed, we do know that birds evolved from dinosaurs, which were reptilian or reptile-like, and crocodiles are reptiles. So that kind of makes sense. All right, lastly, when we talk about evidence of evolution, we can look at biogeography. What does that mean? That means species that are related to each other often come from the same area. So let's just take a pause for a second and imagine a mountain goat. If I have a mountain goat from the Andes Mountains in South America, it's going to be more closely related to other animals in South America than it is to a mountain goat in the Rocky Mountains. Yes, they both have similar adaptations to their similar environments, and we'll address that in just a second. But because the geography separates them, they're more likely to be more closely related to organisms in their area. So you're going to watch this video, excuse me. It's 11 minutes long. You have some questions to answer about that. And we have a couple terms to go over before we finish up the evidence PowerPoint. We need to review converge versus diverge. We started this chapter with microevolution versus macroevolution. Let's review converge versus diverge. If two lines converge, they come together. If lines diverge, they separate. So when we think about divergent evolution, we're thinking about like basic evolution, getting more and more and more different from what organism, like the ancestor. So here on this left side, we've got an early primate, and because of divergent evolution, the ancestor changed due to environmental pressures and accumulated differences, and now we have all these different species of apes. Same is true for this terrestrial animal. Because of divergence, we have climbing animals, we have flying animals, and we have other terrestrial animals, and some that actually live in the ocean. Opposite of divergent evolution is convergent evolution, when things come together. When we talked about the billy goats or the mountain goats in the Andes and the mountain goats in the Rocky Mountains having similar adaptations, but not being really related to each other because they live on different continents, that's going to be due to convergent evolution. Convergent evolution explains similarities, physical traits, adaptations that are similar in very different and unrelated organisms. Why does that happen? It happens because their environment has exerted similar pressure, and the answer to that pressure, or the solution to that pressure, has been these adaptations that make them successful. So this example from your book shows a sugar glider and a flying squirrel. They're basically the same thing, right? Except a sugar glider is actually a marsupial and has a pouch just like a kangaroo and lives in Australia. A flying squirrel is a regular placental mammal, lives in North America, really far away from Australia. But why the heck do they have these flaps of skin and these long tails and sort of streamlined bodies? Well, it's because they both live in the tree tops and they jump from tree limb to tree limb, and organisms that had extra flaps of skin had an advantage over organisms that didn't. Thus, we see the evolution of this particular adaptation. Convergent evolution. Here's some more examples of convergent evolution. I'll move my picture real quick. Probably the most basic example of convergent evolution are sharks and dolphins. They both have a dorsal fin, they both have long streamlined bodies for speed, but one is a fish, the shark, and the other is a mammal, the dolphin. I didn't really know the difference between the pill bug and the pill millipede, but I'm sure there's some. These just came up in my search for convergent evolution. Another good example would be the duck and the duck-billed platypus. They both live in a pond aquatic environment, so webbed feet would be an advantage and a flat bill would be an advantage. And while one is a bird, the duck, and the other one is a mammal, the duck-billed platypus happens to be an egg-laying mammal, we can see similar adaptations because of the similar environmental pressures. Okay, and the last two types of selective forces we're going to talk about are artificial selection and sexual selection. Artificial selection is when man or woman, whatever, we choose what trait we want. This is very, very common in farming. Think of like the first folks that went from hunter gathering to agricultural, and they're like, wow, that big cow makes a lot of milk and has a lot of meat. I'm going to mate the big cow with another big cow so that all of the offspring will be big, and before we know it, all the cows are big. So the trait for largeness was selected for by man. I love, love, love this example right here. If we're talking about eating helpful foods, you can't really do much better than Brussels sprouts, cabbage, broccoli, and kale. And it's no surprise that they all share a common ancestor and they're related to a wild mustard. But because of selective breeding or selective artificial selection by farmers, we have all these different varieties of food. For example, kale is when we select for leaves, and organisms or plants that have the biggest leaves get bred with other plants that have the biggest leaves until all plants have big leaves. If we're going for Brussels sprouts, we're selecting for the axillary bud or the side bud. If we want the cabbage, we're going for the apical bud. And if we want broccoli, we're going to select for flowers and stems. I really have no idea what kohlrabi is. If you know, that's pretty cool. Let me know if it's yummy. But let me tell you what, if you don't like these right now, if you think they're disgusting, throw a little olive oil on them, salt and pepper, a little garlic, pop them in the oven at 400 for 25 minutes, and oh my gosh, delicious. Okay, so that's artificial selection, is when man chooses what trait to be amplified, not nature, man. Sexual selection, on the other hand, is when usually the female, but it can sometimes be the male, they choose what mate or what trait is important, and that trait gets amplified. So let's consider these peacocks right here. Imagine the first peacock that had some really fancy tails, and all the other guy peacocks were like, oh my God, you look ridiculous. Except all the girl peacocks were like, I love your tail. Let's mate because I want my offspring to have tails just like that. Along comes another peahen who says to the peacock, wow, gosh, I really like your fancy tail. Let's mate. I want my offspring to have big fancy tails. And before you know it, this fella who got laughed at because of his bizarre mutation of fancy feathers is leaving more offspring. Those are the ones that are lucky and getting mated with. And before too long, all of the males have this sort of feature. This results in sexual dimorphism when the female looks different than the male. That's true for the white-tailed deer that are around here. The bucks have the antlers. The females don't have that. That's as a result of sexual selection. Okay. Clearly, the females were down with the big racks because they're the ones that got mated with and passed that trait along in the population. So I think that brings us to the end of this PowerPoint. I hope you enjoyed it, and let me know if you have any questions.